Hello and welcome to an Energion Politics Moment. I'm Henry Neufeld of Energion Publications. I'm going to be talking with Chris Eyre, one of our editors. We're going to be talking about Brexit. Before we go there, I want to mention we will be having these politics moments. They're recorded on Friday and posted on our Energion Discussion Network on Saturday morning. Right now, our Global Christian Perspectives, which is not dead, is in the process of a reboot. So we're going to have these politics moments to keep the excitement up. Today, though, mostly information. Chris, welcome.
Hi.
So tell us, just to start out with, what is Brexit?
Well, for 40 plus years, the United Kingdom has been part of what was originally the European Economic Community and then became the European Union. When it was the Economic Community, it was really a trading bloc. But it's become something slightly more than that as the European Union. And becoming something slightly more than that is a lot of what people who favoured Brexit object to. Let me see. It might seem entirely foolish to withdraw from a trading bloc which is the largest internal market in the world. There are problems with that. Along with free movement of capital, goods and services, they determined that we had to have free movement of labour. This ends up producing really quite a lot of immigration from Europe into this country, which wasn't too bad until Europe enlarged to include, for instance, Poland and Romania and various other Eastern European states, where the standard of living, the wages have been historically a lot lower because they're ex-communist states and they haven't really caught up yet. And so we are getting an awful lot of people on the streets speaking Polish and other totally incomprehensible languages from our point of view. And people think that it's stealing our jobs. I personally think they're wrong because, frankly, most of the jobs they're doing, we weren't doing otherwise, and people were having difficulty finding workers for those jobs. However, that's a major issue for a lot of people. The other is that by a set of treaties, the structure of the European Union has increased. Now, another issue that people object to is a large amount of EU regulation. Obviously, if you've got a common market for goods and services, you need to have the same kind of regulation of those. You need to have the same consumer protection, the same kind of trading standards, that kind of thing. You also need the same kind of environmental regulations, which is a big issue to some people. And you need the same kind of labour laws, because otherwise people can undercut by treating their workers like slaves, basically. So there's a lot of regulation has come with it increasingly. But also the thrust has been for more and more integration to the point where people are fearing that we are basically joining a federal state, a United States of Europe, if you like. The snag there is that people do not see the European Union as being particularly democratic. It has a parliament, but the parliament there doesn't initiate any legislation. The legislation is initiated by the European Commission, which consists of a set of appointees who are ultimately appointed by the set of European governments, and there's a third body, the European Council, which consists of ministers from each country. They instituted a limited form of majority voting some years ago, which meant that for the first time Britain could be voted down on some issues. So the feeling is that we aren't masters of our own fate anymore, that things are being decided by a not terribly democratic organisation, very distant from the people of this country, and people don't like the lack of sovereignty that involves. A bit like some Americans think of the federal government.
Yeah, I would say it is a bit like some Americans think of the federal government, but also, say, on the economic level, the way some Americans think of something like NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which brings up all of those same issues, regulation of the labor market, the economy of Mexico. So Canada and the United States are close in economic terms. Mexico was not considered as developed,
Yes.
and so that's kind of the same as some of the Eastern European economies, which were, lived under communism and so on. So the issues then, I think, Americans would be familiar. It would be sort of a combination of, if somebody made NAFTA closer,
Yes.
and you have the federal government versus local interests. So I think that gives it a connection for Americans. Now let's ask a couple of questions dealing with British politics.
Oh yes.
In specifically, as I've read on some stories on the BBC, legally a referendum doesn't have a binding nature. Is that correct, or is that overstating it?
That might be overstating it. Theoretically, for the United Kingdom, Parliament is sovereign. Parliament can do what it likes, and that is, broadly speaking, the House of Commons can do what it likes, because though we have a House of Lords which is horribly undemocratic, being largely hereditary or appointed, it only really has a delaying function these days. So the power rests with the House of Commons, and the House of Commons decides all law. We don't have a constitution which binds the House of Commons as such, though it is bound to some extent by, for instance, international treaties such as the European Convention on Human Rights, to which we're a signatory, which gives us something equivalent to your Bill of Rights. Now, as Parliament is sovereign, fundamentally, what is law here is decided by a vote of the elected representatives in the House of Commons. to put it simply. So we're a representative democracy. If we have a referendum, it only has the amount of force which the Act of Parliament which sets up the referendum has given it. So we have previously had a referendum as to whether we change the system of voting from a first past the post to a proportional one, and there the Act that established the referendum said that we would follow the result of the referendum. So that referendum, had it gone in favour of proportional representation, would have produced a law. This one, they didn't actually put in any provision which bound them in the future. So it might be regarded as purely advisory. The problem there is that, as far as certainly England was concerned, almost all the areas were at least slightly in favour of leave. Now, we had a general election last year, which elected our 650 MPs. Going into this campaign, 479 of them were in favour of staying in the Union. That is a very, very substantial majority, and that was elected on a representative democracy basis last year. This year we have a technically non-binding referendum result which goes the other way. You'd have to get a majority in Parliament to go the next step in the process to leaving Europe. And that, of course, means that if you were to get a majority, a lot of MPs would have to change their stance from the one they got elected on. But an awful lot of those who were pro-Remain are now looking at the figures from their areas and seeing that their voters voted Leave. So they would be slightly worried about getting re-elected if they then said, "Oh, but I was elected last year on the basis of stay, and I can ignore the referendum." That's about where we see ourselves at the moment.
Okay, so just don't take a long time on it, because I do want to ask one question about the portions of the United Kingdom that might become disunited.
Yes.
First, just one quick question. If for some other reason, such as leadership issues, and in the second half here, we're going to talk about the current situation in the Labour Party, which I think illustrates British politics for an American audience fairly interestingly. But basically, if for some other reason it became necessary to hold another election, which, unlike ours, where the election is every 2 years for the House and every 4 years for the President and every 6 years for the Senate, a parliamentary election can be called. So if you had a parliamentary election that was called, it would theoretically then be possible for the new parliament to say, well, we've now stood for election and we were sent back here and we still want to remain. And so having been elected after the referendum, we're going to consider that. Would that be...
That would be quite feasible. And we have actually, for about 5 years now, theoretically had fixed-term parliaments for 5 years. Once every 5 years, everybody gets turfed out, and we have a new election. And that can only fall down under some rather specialised circumstances. But we've got political parties so divided at the moment that it seems entirely possible that nobody can form a government with a majority in the future. Certainly, I'm looking forward to the possibility that the Conservatives may not be able to find a leader who can bring the whole party together. They have, at the moment, a thin majority of 12, it wouldn't take a lot of dissident MPs to say no, we are not going along with this. And also there are issues like votes of no confidence. It could also well be that a new leader would feel that it was right for there to be an election and would push for that to be the case, and certainly Parliament could vote for that. And I think quite a few people in Parliament in principle would like that, except for the state of the parties at the moment, which we will come on to at another point. Yeah, that's basically where we are.
Okay. One last question on Brexit then. Just like I guess some folks in England and Wales want to leave the European Union, the folks in Scotland and Northern Ireland did not.
Yeah.
In particular, the folks in Scotland did not, by a rather substantial and universal number. I mean, every district of Scotland voted to stay.
Yes.
At least if I read the map correctly.
Oh, you're not wrong.
And a majority of them in Northern Ireland.
Mm-hmm.
So just in a sense, like those in England and Wales can feel that they don't want to live with the policies of Brussels, Scotland and Northern Ireland can decide that they don't wish to live with the policies of Westminster. So what's the story going forward there as you see it?
Well, it's only 2 years ago that we had a referendum in Scotland as to whether Scotland should be independent. And staying part of the United Kingdom narrowly won on that occasion. And part of the reason that was advanced for Scotland staying in was that it wasn't entirely certain that Scotland would then be able to stay part of Europe if it left the UK. Now, of course, the UK seems to be wanting to leave Europe. Scotland still wants to stay, and I don't think there's very much doubt that if the UK actually does initiate the procedure to leave Europe, Scotland will then have a very quick second referendum, and I think it would win in favour of secession this time, which would leave us with a slightly truncated United Kingdom. Northern Ireland is actually possibly a bigger problem. Northern Ireland, of course, has a land border with Ireland, which would stay part of Europe. So we would suddenly have a land border with Europe that we've never had before, and that would want to be a hard border because of the likes of the Brexit fraternity. But the whole Northern Ireland peace agreement between the Protestants and the Catholics, the Unionists and the Republicans, the two tend to coincide in terms of religion. The whole peace process was predicated on both sides being members of Europe, and suddenly that's cast into doubt. There are already calls on the Republican side for a new look at that and a vote as to whether to be a united Ireland. I'm not entirely sure that Ireland wants Northern Ireland back, because the problems that we had with dissident Republican Catholics previously, they would have with dissident Unionist Protestants after Ireland did leave, I suspect. But the whole peace process there could be called into doubt, and we could have a new set of troubles in Northern Ireland as a result.
Okay, I think that information will help some of our American audience understand this a little bit better. It's one of those things that I think stays under the radar for American viewers until it happens. And based on the fact that what is the European Union was one of the top Google searches in the UK the day after, maybe it stayed under the radar over there.
There's a certain amount of buyer's regret going on at the moment in some areas. Very few people who voted Leave actually thought that they would win.
Okay, well, we're going to call that the conclusion to this subject. When we post these on EDN, this will be the end of the first segment